So one of my keys to growing my portfolio the last couple of years has been the ability to put together other people's capital into my deal and use that to continue to grow out my portfolio. Now, in theory, it's a fantastic concept, right? Basically, it's a win-win. I get to continue to buy more buildings, get a small percentage ownership, whereas the investors that invest the capital usually also do very well, right? They either get a percent ownership in the building or get some sort of fixed rate of return, and it's supposed to be a win-win. Now, it's a great model, but what a lot of people don't realize, it can be incredibly stressful to execute on. There's a lot of different stress points that happen both logistically and transactionally that a lot of people just don't think about. So in this video, what I thought I would do is give you an honest look at what it's actually like to put these kinds of deals together, especially when you're working with other people's money, and some of the key stress points that can happen along the way. So with that, let's get at it. What's going on, guys? My name's Lior and welcome back to my channel. Now, as I said in this video, I'm gonna be talking about what it's actually like to put the process together of putting other people's money in place in order to go buy more buildings and how it can be so stressful. Now, before I get into that though, super quickly, guys, if this is your first time on my channel, first of all, welcome. And second of all, make sure you smash that subscribe button for me. I put out tons of new videos every single week talking everything about rental property investing, whether it's walking you guys through my projects, showing you guys stories, strategies, tactics, even like a video like this. So if this is the kind of content you're looking for, make sure you subscribe. So let's start from the very beginning. Before we even put a deal under contract, what are you supposed to do as someone that operates under this model in terms of having the money and other people's cash ready to go? Well, the work starts way before you put a deal under contract, right? You're supposed to be working on nurturing your investor database all the time, right? And the way you grow out your investor database is literally, there's many different ways, but I've done it through hosting meetups, right? Doing these kinds of YouTube videos. I've got monthly newsletters that go out and show everything that we're doing. Been on podcasts, I go to networking events, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do to really get your name out there and connect with potential investors who would be interested in going into your deals. But that's really where the work starts. And this is still pretty boiled down, right? I mean, there's a lot more obviously to it, but at a high level, that is where you typically begin if you're gonna operate under this model. So now that you kind of have your quote unquote garden more or less ready to go, right, that you can pick from, now here's what happens next, right? When you're actually looking at deals and analyzing deals, right? Let's say someone sends you a deal or something, if you're just a solo investor, you would run the numbers, see if the numbers work for you, and you'd either be yes or no, right? Well, it becomes a lot more complicated when you're dealing with other people's money, right? Because there's obviously returns you need to make for your time and for putting these projects together, but just as critical, you need to make money for your investors, right? Otherwise, why would they invest? So you actually have to analyze too, in addition whether the deal is good, whether there's opportunity for your investors, right? And whether that's the right call for your particular types of investors. There's plenty of deals that if I was a solo investor, had my own source of capital for all of them, I would have bought them all. But there's just some deals that I've had to pass on because I knew that I couldn't put an attractive enough structure in place in order to really make it appealing for my investor pool. So you really have to think about both sides. So what happens when you actually put a deal under contract, right? Let's say you analyze a bunch of deals, one you put under contract that looks to work for you, looks to work for your investors. What happens then? Well, usually what I do is once I actually put a deal under contract, I'm gonna tighten up the underwriting, right? Really gonna get super detailed, and really hammer out the exact returns again for myself, but just as importantly for my private investors, right? And really figure out what the proposition is. Now, once that's done, usually I'll put together a PDF or like a deck, they call it, right? And I'll basically explain the opportunity, right? So I'll go over the building, the business strategy, why I like it, the financials behind it for the building, the financials behind it for the investors, which is probably the most important part they're looking for, right? So you really want to present the opportunity, put it nicely together, and you're gonna share with the people that you know. Now, one key thing I would say about this step is I usually really try to emphasize like what is so special about this, right? Because, you know, especially if a private investor really is going to invest, he's probably connected with a number of operators, I call them, people like myself that actually execute on deals. So you really want to try and figure out, why is this project special, right? Why is this asset special? Why is this location special? Is it a great price? Is it just an amazing location? Like, what's the kind of the big hook, right, as to why someone would actually want to invest in this kind of deal? So once I get those materials out, the next 30 to 40 days of the actual transaction, right, when I'm actually closing on the building, are spent essentially having conversations with private investors, right? And it can be very stressful, right? Because typically you have to raise a certain sum amount of money, and you know about how many conversations and how many folks you're gonna have to get on board with that. And it's not just having conversations with the investors themselves. A lot of times you also have to have conversations with their attorneys, with their CPAs, like their family, advisors, right? Because it's a big decision for each private investor to invest in your deal. So there might be multiple stakeholders involved. It becomes very time intensive and a lot of different pieces moving to make sure that it is the best move for both you as well as the private investor. Now, depending on how big of a raise it is and depending on what the access of your investor pool, right, things can certainly get tight, right? Because I've definitely been in situations where we're starting to get to kind of close to the closing timeline, and we may not necessarily have all the funds we need in place, right? Obviously a lot of times we certainly do, but there's definitely been instances where I've been a week or so away from closing and I still don't have all the required funds to raise. So in those situations, yes, it's stressful, but there's different things you can do, right? I mean, sometimes I will just bridge it with my own money, right? So if I need a certain amount of money left that I haven't raised yet, I will go ahead and put in my own cash, whether on a permanent basis or a temporary basis, right? Because the other thing you need to understand is timing, of course, is everything, and you can't always control it. So some investors might want to invest in your deal, but they can only do it in a month, right? And that could be post-closing. So you just need to have the kind of a backup plan of like, okay, if the entire race doesn't come through, how am I actually gonna cross the finish line, right? And this is one of those key points that, you know, always drives me a little bit crazy when people say, oh, it's a no money deal down and you don't need your own money. Like, in theory, you don't, right? Because in theory, you're using other people's money. But believe me, I use a lot of my own money, right? There's a lot of different circumstances where you got to pay for costs up front, especially legal, closing costs, all that stuff. And again, there's going to be situations where you're going to have to bridge any sort of gaps that you didn't raise. So when people tell you don't need any money, well, that's not really true, right? Like, you certainly need to, especially if you're going to be doing something like this at scale. I mean, there's always going to be little holes, or little or big holes, depending on the project, that you're going to have to fill in between. So once an investor commits, right, and I have kind of everything pulled up, you know, and all the proper legal docs have been signed as well, that's when typically the process kind of winds down, right? We go ahead, close on the deal, and then kind of continue with our business plan, right? And even after you close, there's still quite a bit to do, right? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, you are managing other people's money in this deal, right? So you want to make sure, you know, it takes quite a bit of work to make sure you're being communicated with them, updating them accordingly about if there's any challenges, if there's anything, you know, that's not going right or is going right, if the timeline's still in place. That's kind of a whole nother conversation, a whole nother topic about, you know, communication with folks after you close. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of different stress points along the way, even just from transactions, right? Just from start to finish on closing on an asset. So hopefully that's helpful, guys. Hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of a peek into what it's really like into trying to operate on the strategy. Again, it's a fantastic strategy and I'm a super, super big believer on it, but understand that there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of things moving around. There's a lot of people involved. And it's, you know, you really got to get super, super educated if you're going to be doing something like this. So if you guys have any questions, just put them in the comments below and I will definitely help you out.